Recording in progress.
Okay, you got me?
Yes,
You hear me?
yep, we can hear you. We can see your screen.
Excellent. You see the screen?
Yes, yeah, it's looking great.
Excellent. Great. Well, hopefully Mike will be joining us. We can work out those technical issues with him while I talk first. So I'm going to give the beginning of a 40-year retrospective on our Trumpeter Swan recovery program. But first, I want to thank NRF and the past directors, Marty Hennert, Laurie Ostendorf, and Charlie Luthen, who were really instrumental in helping develop the funding for this program. And I want to specifically acknowledge the work of Barb Barzin, who was the principal fundraiser for NRF for many, many years. So with that, I want to talk about trumpeter swans. Trumpeter swan is one of 3 swan species that occur in Wisconsin. It is the largest native waterfowl species that we have. It weighs 21 to 30 pounds. Males sometimes exceed 35 pounds. Has a wingspan of over 7 feet and stands about 4 feet tall. It looks similar to the tundra swan, which is a bit smaller, and the trumpeter has a red stripe along its lower mandible. And the tundra swan has, in about 80% of tundra swans, there is a yellow spot in front of the eye, but that's not always noticeable. So the best way to really distinguish the tundra and trumpeter swan is through their vocalizations. And the trumpeter's vocalization is loud, sonorous, bugle-like or trumpet-like, hence the name trumpeter swan. And tundra swans, from a distance, as you might hear a flock, sound like a pack of baying hounds. They're very high-pitched. The third species is the mute swan, which I'll show a picture of here shortly. And that has a orange bill with a black fleshy knob at the base of the bill that extends to the forehead. So those are the three species that we have in Wisconsin. So I want to shift here and talk about our wonderful co-authors here. Should mention that Mike, who will be talking after me, Mike and Lisa were really seminal figures in the development evolution of the reintroduction program. They really laid the foundation during the 9 years that they were involved, from 89 through 97. And Mike will talk a lot about their research and their work. Pat Manthe over to the left here, being greeted by a friend at Trumpeter Swan Nest, followed in Mike and Lisa's footsteps. She was really the what I would call my field general, who carried on the monitoring and attended to the growing flock that we had for 16 years, from 1998 right through 2013. So absolutely critical, the work that she took on. The population increased 14-fold during the years that she was involved. So she had a lot of days and evenings were devoted to trumpeter swans. Lower left, Becky Abel, being greeted here by a decoy reared swan that was breeding. She was responsible with Professor Stanley Temple and as well as Mike for pioneering the decoy rearing technique beginning in 1989. I should mention that also that when I co-wrote the recovery plan in 1986 for trumpeter swans, decoy rearing was not part of it. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Ed Diebold, lower center picture here. Ed Diebold, the late Ed Diebold, who passed away in 2024, was the curator of birds at the Milwaukee County Zoo. He was the fellow later with Kim Smith, who was in charge of all of our swan eggs that we collected in Alaska and brought back to Wisconsin. Absolutely critical to the success of the program. And then last but not least, certainly not least, is Randy Jurwitz. And Randy was my boss for many, many years, provided very wise counsel to us. He was also along on each of the egg collection trips to Alaska and had a critical role, a very important role in maintaining the containers into which we put the eggs that we had collected to make sure that they stayed at the optimum temperature between 97 and 99 degrees. And he was absolutely critical to overseeing my work and overseeing the entire progress of the program. So here's a map from a 1985 National Geographic. And what you see in yellow here is the historic breeding range of the trumpeter swan. In light green are the wintering areas. You can see in the far east along the Chesapeake Bay and then down the Mississippi to the Gulf Coast. And in orange is basically the nesting areas at that time. You can see from this map that the largest concentration of nesting trumpeter swans was up in Alaska. And the Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge and Yellowstone National Park, what are known as the tri-state population of southwestern Montana, then Idaho and Wyoming. It's from that population, which is basically a non-migratory population, that transplants occurred. And you can see those red dots where birds were transplanted. So in 1985, the only population that we had really in what's called the interior population, which Wisconsin is part, along with Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Ontario to the north, Minnesota, of course, very important. There are actually two other, for administrative purposes, trumpeter swan populations. There's the Pacific Coast population that you see to the left, and then the interior population, and then the Rocky Mountain population, comprised of birds from Alberta that migrated down to the Red Rock Lakes area. So it was from those Red Rock Lakes non-migratory birds that the first introductions occurred. And the earliest known North American record was in 1587. Actually, it's called an extraliminal record, or in other words, it was outside of this yellow area that you see here. It occurred in the East Caicos Islands, southeast of southern Florida. And that's the earliest known record reported by wildlife artist John White. So in Wisconsin, we had trumpeters nesting up until about the 1880s. The bird was prized for its feathers, which were used to adorn fashionable women's hats along the East Coast and in Europe. This was actually, an upper right here is a shot of a millinery shop in Watertown, which is in Jefferson County. And then the lower right is a pile of trumpeter skins, which were basically ground into powder puffs. So the bird was prized for its feathers, for its skins, and its meat. And the combination of those factors led to its near extirpation in the country, in North America. So what we did is that we started with cross fostering, a technique called cross fostering. As I mentioned, this was one of the techniques that was described in the original recovery plan. that I wrote with Tim Andrick and John Wetzel back in 1986. And the idea here was to use avicultural trumpeter swan eggs and put them under mute swans in at locations in the southeastern Wisconsin. Unfortunately, this technique, which was really worked on by researcher Dick Hunt and wildlife biologist David Matthews with Becky and Mike, was not successful. We had 35 eggs that we used. From that, largely because of snapping turtle predation, we only were able to see one cygnet that survived to fledging. So, despite our best intentions, this technique did not work. But what happened was that once we began egg collection in 1989, where we collected 385 eggs, when we were very fortunate to have 93% hatching success. And that was in large part due to the efforts of Terry and Mary Kohler flying us back from Alaska. And as I mentioned, the efforts of Ed Diebold. In the wild, it's at least at that time, with the hatch success was 60 to 80%. And we always left at least 2 good eggs in a nest, so that the pair would have a family to raise. So we attempted to do that. Captive rearing was one of the techniques described in the recovery plan, and basically here you had cygnets that were taken from the zoo, from Milwaukee County Zoo, at about 5 weeks of age or so, and they were raised at a fenced-in pond for 2 years, and this was at the General Electric Medical Systems facility near Pewaukee, and Dennis Hussey was the director of the Swan program there, but Maureen Gross was the DNR wildlife biologist who worked with the birds, who worked with the caretakers, who made sure that the birds were maintained. And then these birds then were released at selected sites in northern Wisconsin at the age of 2 years. We also had what we called captive parent rearing, and there we had cooperators that had birds that were pinioned or could not fly away, and they were allowed to breed. We then would take the young, we take the yearlings, and release those at selected sites in northern Wisconsin. So, what happened then when cross fostering failed? There was the brilliant idea of Stanley Temple working with Becky Abel and Mike Mossman to develop what we call the decoy rearing program. And this program, the advantage that this program had over captive rearing, where birds were raised until they were 2 years of age, is that the birds would learn right away what their environment was like. And so they actually imprinted on the marsh. And this allowed them, when they migrated, to return to that marsh or nearby that marsh. And so the idea was that they would have probably a better chance of surviving in the wild if they got introduced to the wild earlier than 2 years. And so this was a very, very significant technique. You see in the upper left-hand corner there, Becky Abel and her crew were using a trumpeter swan decoy on a pulley. And the thing about the cygnets is once they hatch out, they imprint on the first thing that is moving. And so they learn to associate the movement of this swan with a time to feed and a time to rest. And then at the age of about 3 to 5 days, the birds were flown up to selected wetland sites that Mike Mossman and Lisa Hartman had selected for this program. Marty Johnson is left there with a floating blind, basically the camouflage, so that the he was able then to lead the decoy out into the marsh, and the cygnets then, because they were imprinted on the decoy, would follow along. And this is what they did for 15 weeks until the birds became old enough to fly. And as I mentioned, Stanley Temple was absolutely critical to the development of this technique, working closely with Becky and Mike. So in total, through these three main techniques, decoy rearing, captive rearing, and captive parent rearing, we had the largest number, 49%, 196 birds that were released via decoy rearing, 159 via the captive rearing, or 40%, and then 32 through captive parent rearing, or 8%. So the bulk of those birds, the bulk of our releases were through these three techniques, a total of 394. So the criteria for the release sites that Mike so ably selected along with Lisa, it had minimal human use, no power lines, because power line collisions is a mortality factor for trumpeter swans. Minimal or no waterfowl hunting, and that's important because it only takes 1 or 2 spent lead shot pellets to sicken or kill a trumpeter swan. So we wanted to make sure that these sites were basically had little hunting or no waterfowl hunting. Abundant, diverse submergence and emergence for food, aquatic plants for food, such as the potamogetans, the pondweeds, emergent or shrubby escape cover to get away from potential predators, and abundant, diverse wetlands within 10 miles of the release site in case the birds should choose to go elsewhere. We monitored the trumpeter swan flock rigorously up through 2014. And we did this through aerial surveys to locate nests first. Then we went out to the sites and to the nests to determine clutch size. And typically trumpeter swans will lay anywhere from 2 to 9 eggs. Often it's the clutch size is 5 to 9 eggs. They take about 32 days, 33 days to hatch out. The cygnets, as I mentioned, fly when they're about 15, 16 weeks of age. So during this time, a lot of behavioral observations were taken, habitat use, feeding, nesting. We also were monitoring the health of these birds to make sure that they were in good condition to be able to fly at fledging. Then an August flight, aerial flight to locate families and to count cygnets to get a good handle on the production of each nest, each pair, each nesting pair. And then we also would round up the cygnets and put collars on them, typically yellow collars with alphanumeric black numbers and letters. And so these roundups occurred August through into September to mark, do health checks, and to take blood to determine the sex of each bird. And then another flight occurred late September, early October to determine what the actual production was. So Swan Roundup was involved many volunteers, including the International Crane Foundation volunteers and Lacey and Company, and also YCC crews, students that would come out. And what we would do, and this is a picture from the last Swan Roundup in 2012, is because these birds were flightless, we would then chase them down in a kayak or canoe, and then catch them with a long-handled net and take them back to be processed. And unlike geese, which are often very aggressive towards the bander, trumpeter swan, cygnets, or in the case where we had flightless molting adults, are very docile. Once you have them in hand, they are very easy to work with. Now, this is quite different than the way they are when they are protecting the nest. There's great deal of variation in how they will respond to the human presence or potential predator at a nest. So you can have some birds that will completely abandon the nest, as we saw in Alaska, or birds that will stand their ground, and often it's the larger trumpeter swan, the what's called the male, the cob. The female is called the pen. The cob would defend the nest, and there have been records in the literature of swans inflicting quite a few bruises or even breaking a few bones with their wings. So there's a great deal of variation with the behavior of swans at the nest. So this was the last roundup in 2012, and at this point, I will shoot it over to Mike, and he'll take you through the research that occurred with swans. Go ahead, Mike.
So Sumner will have you, there's a button that says stop sharing on the top of your screen.
Okay.
Perfect. And then Mike, you can use the share screen option at the bottom banner of your screen.
Mike, you're muted.
There you go. That is the graph up there?
Yeah.
Second. Is the let's see. I'm not seeing the slide.
Do you have a secondary screen or a secondary monitor at all?
Yes, I do. Is that what's showing? Is it a graph?
There's
Yeah.
like, we can see your PowerPoint with like the slides along the side panel and then the one you're on.
Get rid of that. Let me just give me another shot here. There we go. Is that good?
We can see the slide. It's just kind of amongst the other PowerPoint slides.
Okay.
So while Mike is doing that, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Yeah, so I just want to say that our original recovery goal was 20 breeding and migratory pairs by the year 2000. And then Mike will show how we've progressed since then. Since the year 2000, we actually, Mike will talk about how we met the recovery goal just before 2000. But go ahead, Mike.
Okay, well, sorry for I'm having a hard time advancing it now. Just a second. Okay.
Yeah, and thanks everyone else for your patience. We had initially wanted to test out all the share screens, but then we had those technical difficulties at the start. So I appreciate our presenters being flexible and all of you as well. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. This on my screen it shows just the slide, but I've tried several times to get it to work, so I'll just go with it. So the trumpeter swan research was an important part, as Sumner's mentioned, in this whole recovery program. And our research focused from 1987 and then including the 1988 field season when we worked on the second year of the cross fostering with mute swans. And then the next year, beginning not only looking at the birds that were released by parent rearing and captive rearing, but the new decoy rearing technique. So in this graph, you can see the success of the program, and basically from 1989 to about 1998 is when we were doing the research. We wanted to get things on a good track, and it did, and it was based on lots and lots of collaboration and research, just being one part of that. We had many things that we wanted to look at in the trumpeter swan release program, especially with developing new techniques and comparing them. mortality was one thing. Can birds sustain mortality? We need to monitor to see that. If there were mortality problems, try to figure out how to mitigate those. As you can see in those early years of the program, that lead poisoning was the largest mortality factor. Shooting was another big one, unfortunately, especially early in the program when people weren't expecting trumpeter swans, especially on the wintering grounds. That's reduced since then. Power line collisions, as Sumner mentioned, and then a smattering of many other causes, including disease, even human defense. You can see there are a few birds that died as a result of being so aggressive that people had to defend themselves against them, or they hit moving cars and that sort of thing. So some of these data are basically all from that research program, from that first decade, basically, of the Trumpeter Swan
Mike,
program.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think we're still looking at like a bar graph instead of like your pie chart or sorry.
That's all right. I don't know if I hit escape, if that's safe or not. These aren't advancing then for you.
No.
Okay.
There you go. Now we are looking at the pie chart.
Okay, but we're still, let me see if I can, maybe if I start this from the beginning, we'll go back to there now, is it?
Yeah,
Just a
yeah,
slide?
full screen now. Yep.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
it's all right. All right. So here's did that advance? We're on mortality pie chart.
We are, yes.
This is what I was just talking about. Lead poisoning, power line collisions, and shooting being the main mortality factors. And so, you try to adjust to these things the best you can. And we kept trying to find sites to release birds that had little history of lead poisoning, and sites that didn't have power lines, but you can't control where the birds go once they fly. And the power line, and then the shooting. And that came from, that eventually was reduced from education and people just starting to care about the birds and being used to seeing them. So these data are, again, from like the first decade, the kind of stuff that we needed to keep track of to monitor how things were working. Comparison of the different techniques was important. We wanted to know, do decoy reared birds mix with the other birds with other techniques? Decoy birds were different because they migrated the first fall of their life when they're really set to migrate. Captive reared birds tended not to migrate, or to migrate short distances, because they were in captivity during those first couple critical fall periods, and did not exercise that innate need to migrate. But you can see here the male origin, the female origin, that in the early years of the program, decoy reared birds hooked up with other decoy reared birds quite a bit, but also with captive reared birds and wild produced birds eventually. So all techniques were eventually mixing, and there didn't seem to be problems with birds behaving too differently, and they were able to socialize and mate together regardless of the technique. Some of the problems that we had with captive reared birds was that they were used to people, and some were sort of imprinted on people. And not only did they tend not to migrate, they tended to associate with people and be found and occur in places where they, especially once the males became aggressive, when they started to breed, they could be very aggressive towards people. But with time, things worked out. Another good thing about decoy rearing was that you could get a lot of birds out there. We had broods of 10 cygnets, of many cygnets at once that could be reared. It was very energy intensive, took a lot of attention from the swan mamas, as we called them. And this went on for years. And thanks to all those folks that took all that time to take care of birds, especially being out in the marsh, led and directed by Becky Abel and the people that followed her. But you can see that the blue columns here in the lower right are age at first breeding. So decoy birds, where birds were allowed to fly that first year, they could nest at age 2, especially in this population where there's a lot of available habitat and not very many territorial birds to keep a young bird from breeding. Captive and parent-reared birds, of course, couldn't breed at age 2. They were still in captivity, or were just the captive parent-reared birds was just a small sample. Wild produced birds, also could breed at age 2. And this is, these graphs would be changing now as habitat is being taken up by breeding pairs. It's not as easy for a 2-year-old bird to breed with all the experienced adults, older birds out there. But during the first part of the program, it could be fairly common, especially, like I say, with those decoy birds. If you look at the upper left graph here, you see that nest success, basically, was always, somewhere between 50% and 80%, except for 1991, which we had a bad year. And you can understand how in those first years, especially when you have a bad year for one reason or another, it can make a huge difference because the population is so low. And there's not that many pairs out there. They're not in very wide diversity or geographic expanse. So you get bad weather, et cetera. In one area, it can wipe out the population. And unsuccessful nests are normal to have some of those. And in '96, the problem with unsuccessful nests was both conditions that year, but also the fact that a lot of young birds entered the population. And if you look down at the lower left, you can see that young birds, years experience, had poorer nest success than older birds, as you'd expect. Over on the right, the graph looks at the experience of breeders and how that changed with time. So you can see that up to, the first couple years, first 3 years, it was mostly birds in their first year. And as you get from 92 on, you start getting more birds that are older, that are experienced, these other colors other than the brown. And that was helping the population to grow faster. And the population did expand. This is going fast forwarding up to 2014. And the release areas were up in the upper left, where you can see that number of 154 in the Crex Meadows and Burnett County area. And then some of the release sites were in the Northern Highland landscape. Not that many, but a lot of birds ended up there. And then we had a lot of releases eventually in the Central Sands, like at Necedah and Meadow Valley. And but a lot of these birds were expanding, and like down in the lower left, the 10 nests in the southwest, those are all birds produced from up north that were expanding. The lower Wisconsin River actually was our next target for releasing birds, but we decided we didn't need to release anymore at that point by 98 or so. So they were expanding on their own, and one of the signs that we didn't need to do intensive research anymore. Breeding habitat was important to understand, both for release, but also you want to release the birds in a suitable site. You also want a lot of habitat to be nearby so that population can expand, and so that when water conditions get low hydrology or high water levels, different years, different sites are going to be more or less suitable. So you want a selection of habitats for birds. And you can see here the sorts of things that were important. One thing I want to mention is that in northern Wisconsin, where shallow water bodies are not that common, you tend to be deeper lakes and a little more sterile without as much food as in the south, that beaver flowages were super important. And it was, it's another reason why we need beaver on the landscape. They provide perfect habitat generally for trumpeter swan nesting. we wanted the population to be naturally migrating. And with trumpeter swans, that migration happens, first migration for any cygnets, for example, happens in the fall. And normally they're following their parents to a safe traditional migration site. When you start the program, we're letting birds go. We're not trying to manipulate where they go for the winter. And we lost a lot of birds as a result. And that was, again, another reason for keeping this intense monitoring, because there was high mortality early on. And birds flew down to Texas. These cygnets, the decoy birds took off. They always took off, and they always migrated, and usually for long distances. But they still did not have any tradition. There were no tried and true routes, no tried and true wintering sites that were safe. And they eventually had to just find these by themselves. And it took several years for that to happen, but it did. These traditions are very important. And also in the winter, those are places where birds often congregate. And this is where we found that birds that eventually mated were first seen together on their wintering grounds. It's apparently where they met and connected. And you can see the increasing use of traditional wintering areas here. The blue bars being, new sites that have been that were not used before, and other sites eventually completely dominating the traditional sites. And this was from the satellite tracking that went on. I won't talk about this much. It was after when I was not working with swans anymore, but shows birds from Wisconsin and going down to the traditional sites in Illinois and Indiana, and also a few that stay around. We could follow these lines. Also, some of these birds wandered. These were normally birds that were separated from their families, wandered their first fall, and eventually generally made it south. And some adults too would wander, during the years, exploring new territory, like going north, as you can see. Difference from the late 90s, when we did the first breeding bird atlas, and the atlas done that's just about ready to be published, in the 2000 teens and 20s. Big expansion.
I just wanted to hop in with a quick time check, Mike. We'll have about 10 minutes to go here.
Okay.
Just want to let you know.
As you can see here, it says a 26-year-old bird. Some of these birds lasted that long. Most of them by that age won't have their collars anymore, so it's probably more out there than we realize. Look at that. I mean, I wouldn't have believed this when we started the program, that now we would have something like 15,000 trumpeter swans during the breeding season in Wisconsin. You see the confidence interval there is quite wide, but it's, over 8,000 birds that we have that are potential breeders now. And the last slide, just the lessons learned. It's really important to have organized efforts when you do this, with a lot of collaborators and a lot of agreement, discussion, and ability to adjust as you go along. The decoy rearing was one example of that, of just a whole new idea that could change course and was really important to the success. And partnerships are so important, and Sumner has identified about 700 partnerships that were involved in this, and it's a ridiculously large number, but that's what it takes. So that's, here's a small list of those partners, which I'll just leave right for there. And if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, so we had a few questions in the Q&A chat. The first one, were the people in the decoy blinds out with the cygnets all day and night for 15 weeks?
They were, no, go ahead, Sumner.
Yeah, so they were out during the day. They would take them in the evening, so they weren't out at night. They were, the cygnets were in basically fenced in little cages area that was opened in the morning, and they were let out into the marsh at that time. But no, they were not out throughout the evening.
Great. Another question, has cross-fostering worked with other bird species? Were there any takeaways to improve cross-fostering for swans or other species from the 1 year unsuccessful attempt?
Well,
The
we tried it. We tried it. Mike, why don't you go ahead? Go ahead, Mike.
well, the cross fostering has worked with some species. It often doesn't because of differences in the species and their behavior. With trumpeters and mute swans, one of the big differences was that first of all, mute swans graze; they don't feed in the bottom so much. The trumpeter swans are more bottom feeders. That's why they have that thicker bill. And so trumpeter swans would pick up lead pellets, so they could be cross fostered in a like down at McWanago where mute swans were doing fine, but the trumpeter swans, the last one to survive that fledged, died of lead poisoning, whereas none of the mute swans were dying of lead poisoning. So there's a habitat difference. Also, mute swans will make a call that and communicate with their cygnets that will get up on their back. And most people have seen pictures of this somewhere of mute swans with little cygnets on their back. Well, they can avoid underwater predators that way. It doesn't work with trumpeter swans, so the mute swans, I think we're expecting the trumpeter cygnets to get on their backs. The trumpeters never did, and most of them were apparently taken by snapping turtles.
Yeah,
Thanks,
it was
Mike.
really snapping turtle predation that doomed the cross fostering effort for both years, 87 and 88.
Thank you. Another question, was this the first ever attempt at decoy rearing of birds?
I don't think, no, not of decoy ring, but with swans, it was the first attempt. But I'm not that familiar with it. And if Becky or Stan were online, they could probably answer that one.
That's
Yeah,
fair.
it was been used before. I think with gray
Used
lag
in
geese.
captivity, like at the Crane Foundation is where a lot of it was pioneered. But those weren't birds in the wild. Anyway, go ahead, Sumner.
Yeah, no, I was going to say this was unique to swans. This was the first time this was ever attempted with swans, and so it was really a very important initiative that Stan Temple developed along with Mike and Becky Abel. So we're very proud. Some people have referred to this as the Wisconsin style.
We had another question. How is the population size estimated generally? Is it from band recaptures, aerial surveys of nests, drones? What would it be?
So now it's primarily aerial surveys. So there are transects that are set up across the country, across the state, I should say. Well, also across the country, aerial surveys primarily is the technique for the established populations. And in Wisconsin, we have a total of 96 transects. So these occur. The Bureau of Wildlife Management conducts these spring aerial surveys. The next one will occur in May, and it's from those surveys that we get the indication of what we call the BPOP or breeding population estimate is.
These surveys are done for waterfowl, for all waterfowl together. So it's not just they're not done for trumpeters.
Right. It's not just uniquely. Wisconsin. Our trumpeter swans are simply part of that waterfowl survey. But we did create. A fellow by the name of Ron Gaddy used to work for the Integrated Science Services. He added 30 additional transects onto the traditional waterfowl survey to provide more comprehensive coverage for swans.
Great. And then last comment here from Shay Armstrong. They said, my dad was involved with the initial efforts on the Red Rock Lakes Refuge in the late 1970s. He was a wildlife biologist, and they were doing the original banding for tracking.
Well, hats off to him. Here's an ovation for him. Fantastic.
And then Anne said, very interesting presentation and congratulations on a successful program.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize again how important this program, in terms of how important it was in terms of the number of cooperators. It really was a case where there wasn't any single individual organization. It was really a collaboration of all of these different partners as well as the public that allowed us to have the success that we have.
And I also want to thank Sumner is very aware of this as well, because he's one of the people that need to be thanked this way. But a lot of people involved in this program were completely dedicated to it. I think about Becky Abel and all the swan mamas, all the people that took those swans out there, and the people that organized that. How much dedication that takes. It's not always fun and games being out in a blind like that, moving your swans around all day and being responsible for them and having to fight off deer flies and mosquitoes.
That's a good segue, Mike. I wanted just to read off the names of the individuals that were involved with the decoy rearing, if I may.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
in 1989, Becky Abel was the team leader. Carmen Thomas, Eileen Grossman, Richard Payne, Kim Grunwald, later Kim Hartwig. 1990, Becky again as team leader. Laurie Solschenberger, Michelle Young, Rebecca Taylor, Christine Kurtinitis, Kim Hartwig, Eileen Grossman again. And then 1981, Becky again team leader. Tim Trempe, Carmen Thomas, Tom Lasers, Kurt Schmidt, Kim Grunwald, Kim Hartwig, and Dave Grunwald, her husband. 1992, Marty Johnson was the team leader. Rhonda Byers, Kelly Drengler, Paul Keenlance, and Paul Plesh. 1993, Rebecca Christoffel was the team leader. Tim Anderson, Laura Nelson, Becky Seibel, Jennifer White, Paul Plesh. 1994, Jennifer Scoletta was the team leader. Ann Normington, Julie Malik, Christine Tanzer, Jennifer Cole, David Flaspoler was assistant coordinator. Then one more year was 1997. Krista Reinhardt was the team leader. Elisa Bartos, Mike Disher, Lisa Skult, Michael Eisensee, and Nathaniel Ziolik. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Ziolek.
Yes.
So those were the people that Mike just described, that the conditions they had to endure to achieve the success we had with decoy rearing.
And I also want to thank Mitch Bergeson, who's like the best field assistant ever. Thanks, Mitch.
And thank you to you two for taking your time out of your day to talk with us about this incredible success story. This webinar was recorded, so we'll post it if you want to share it out with your friends and family. And yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your lunch hour with us. Thanks, Shelley, for co-presenting with me. And we hope to see some of you at our PBS film sneak peeks that we have on our 40th anniversary landing page. So if you go to wisconservation.org, you'll see our 40th events there. Thank you all and have a good rest of your Tuesday. All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.